Hello and welcome to the Rich Earth Institute's research webinar presenting our agricultural research that we've done over the past couple of years on reducing on-farm ammonia loss from manure and also source-separated urine through fermentation or bio-acidification using the additives of whey and also paper fibers. So we are the Rich Earth Institute, and I'll tell you a little bit about us, and then we'll dig into the details of this research that we did on helping to retain nitrogen in manures and urine. So this is a project that was funded by Northeast SARE, the Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education grant that enabled us to partner with farmers to explore how to best retain the nitrogen in manures and urine. So I'm Julia Kavicki, I'm Rich Earth's Education Director, and today we also have Abe Noe-Hayes here who will be presenting, who is our Research Director, Tatiana Schreiber, our Social Research Director, and also Gretchen Savison, who is our Research Assistant for this project as well. And I just want to say a huge thanks to Bradley Kennedy for helping with the project design, who's one of our board members now. A lot of this research is based on her master's project. And we also have many research assistants to thank who helped with the lab and also social research components of this project, including Emma Allington from the University of Dayton, Josie Rutherford, also from the University of Dayton, Ella Ball from Williams College, and then from the Rich Earth staff, Jamina Shupak, Gretchen Savison, and Arthur Davis. So thanks to everyone who helped make this research possible. So just briefly about Rich Earth Institute, we are a nonprofit based in Brattleboro, Vermont that does research and education all around the vision we have of a world with clean water and fertile soil achieved by reclaiming the nutrients from our bodies as elements in a life-sustaining cycle. And so a lot of the research we do looks at the synergies between source-separated urine and also existing agricultural practices and finding the ways where we can kind of maximize the benefits of both together. And you'll see that in this research project as well. So specifically what we do here in Brattleboro is we have a urine nutrient reclamation program where local urine donors contribute their source-separated urine to us, and we pasteurize those nutrients to provide to local farms. And it's really part of this vision of completing the food nutrient cycle where we can keep nitrogen locally available and reduce reliance on external inputs. And you'll see that through the research here as well. And now I'll pass it off to Abe Noe-Hayes to introduce the concept of ammonia volatilization and methods to reduce it.
Thank you. So ammonia is one of the most abundant forms of nitrogen in manure-based fertilizers. So that covers cattle manure and also human urine that Rich Earth works with. That ammonia is prone to evaporation when it's applied to the field, which means it goes up into the atmosphere and is no longer a fertilizer in the soil, but a pollutant in the atmosphere. And that happens most when the fertilizer has a high pH and it's alkaline. If the pH is low, then that evaporation is inhibited. Thank you. And there's been substantial research already on loss from manure of ammonia. You can see that over half the nitrogen can be ammonia, and up to 90% of that ammonia can be lost if it's not incorporated well into the soil. And that happens quickly, within the first day often. That's from UMass Extension. So our work in this project, sorry, I'm having trouble clicking here. There we go. In this project is to address some of these harms, reduce manure value when the ammonia volatilizes, also odor effects on neighbors, and air pollution that affects humans and the environment. And the way that we are approaching that is through pH adjustment or through acidification. You can add sulfuric acid, that's done extensively in Europe, and that does lower the pH and prevent volatilization. But it also uses a hazardous chemical, which has a substantial expense, and there can be acidification of the soil from that as well. And so our approach is to try to do bio-acidification using carbon-rich waste materials like whey or short paper fibers to drive fermentation. That fermentation makes organic acids like lactic acid, and that lowers the pH. So using waste material to accomplish that same pH lowering. And that's a process that Bradley Kennedy, who Julia mentioned, who's our board member and helped design this, studied extensively as her master's thesis. So it's drawing on that research and taking it further. And benefits from that to farmers are better use of nitrogen fertilizer, fewer purchased inputs, and to the environment, less runoff also potentially other benefits in terms of reducing overapplication of phosphorus and fewer greenhouse gases. And our research has three components. The first one is a farmer partner feasibility assessment. So looking at some real existing farms and trying to imagine how this process could happen on those farms. Then also lab trials that we did here in test tubes and jars, looking at different formulas, different recipes, and how those do or don't work for acidification. And then interviews with more farmers throughout the region to gauge their interest, their thoughts, their input on how this might or might not work for them and what the value might be. And the materials that we used, as I mentioned, are whey. So from cheese making or yogurt making, acid whey from Greek yogurt, and sweet whey from making cheese, hard cheese, and then short paper fibers, which are a byproduct of the paper industry, which have a lot of cellulose and lignin in them. And since we formulated this study, we also learned that there can be issues with PFAS, the forever chemicals, contaminating some short paper fibers. And we don't know much about that yet in terms of which sources might or might not be contaminated. So it's sort of a flag for further investigation, because there could be some environmental problems with some short paper fibers, maybe not with others. And we don't know enough to really comment on that beyond that caveat that this needs further investigation. And now I'll turn it over to Tatiana to talk about our partner farmers. And if you say next slide, Tatiana, we can advance it.
Okay, so thank you. Yes, I'm Tatiana Schreiber. And how is the sound? Can you hear me okay?
Sounds
yes.
Great.
Okay. So just wanted to mention that the partner farmers, Pete Stickney, the farm manager at Elmley Farm, and Leon Korst, the co-owner at Korst Family Farm, are here today. And we'll be sharing some of their thoughts about all of this later in our presentation. But those were the two farmers, and I'm just going to point out a few of the key characteristics of each farm and what we talked about with the farmers to consider the feasibility of using these potential additives to reduce ammonia losses. And so Leon and Pete, I hope you'll correct any errors I make in these descriptions later. We'll give you, both of you, a chance to speak about your thoughts about this a little later in the presentation, and you can correct any mistakes that I make. But anyway, next slide. So at Elmley Farm at the Putney School, it's a small educational farm, currently about 25 cows. They grow forage hay on the farm for the cows. Currently, it's a conventional, what Pete describes as conventional production, no synthetic fertilizers currently being used. And they produce about 1,400 pounds of milk per day and are making cheese on the farm on a small scale, but hoping to increase production in the coming year. And the intention is to make a young Jack cheddar. And there's a lagoon on the farm that collects rainwater, and also leachate from the barnyard where the manure is stacked. And also the wastewater from the washroom also goes in there. And when more cheese is produced, they intend to produce about or Pete estimates about 350 to 400 gallons of whey per month would be available to add to the lagoon. So next slide. So this is the lagoon, and this shows the lagoon that is a plastic lined lagoon, and it holds, it has a capacity of 180,000 gallons. It was built about 18 years ago, and it's not big enough, so they intend to build a bigger one. And that collects all the rainwater that falls on the solid manure pile and all the leachate from the solid manure pile, as I said, and the milk from the washroom. And about 250 gallons of milk room wash water is added. And these pictures show the area where the leachate from the solid manure in this goes into this area where the drain hole is, and that goes over to the lagoon, and also all the leachate from the barnyard. And that's just a picture on the right of the barnyard where the solid manure pile is. You can go to the next slide. Okay, so the situation at Elmley Farm suggests that there's a nice synergism that could happen, because whey is going to be added and it's already created on the farm. And the motivation to do that is to deal with the waste away, but the acidification is another benefit of that. And that could reduce nitrogen losses from the lagoon, but also, which is going to be helpful for when that water is applied to the pasture and the hayfield during irrigation. And, we suggest that this could possibly be a selling point for the farm-fed cheese, that this is happening on the farm. And we also think that paper fiber addition is probably not practical, or Pete has said that it wouldn't be practical because there's no agitation system, and that could clog up the irrigation lines. Okay, next slide. Okay, so moving to the Course Farm. Course Farm is a 6th-generation hill farm in Whitingham, certified organic since 2008, using a no-till system. Leon says that land hasn't been tilled in about 35 or 40 years. And there's a manure storage system that holds 600,000 gallons. It's a concrete walled tank that was built 31 years ago. And the storage tank gets manure not only from the cows, but also from the wash water from the milking facility. And that wash water first goes into a septic tank and then is pumped into the manure storage tank. And about 600 gallons of wastewater are added each day. So next slide. Oh, and these are some images of Leon, who is looking at the manure storage pit, and that shows the crust that forms on the top, which helps to retain nitrogen. And because the manure storage, because the agitation only happens right before the manure is going to be applied on the farm, which happens about 3 times a year, that crust is able to form, and that retains some of the nitrogen. And the picture on the right is showing Leon opening the hatch where the manure from the barn is sent into the storage pit. And theoretically, whey could be added there. Currently, the whey first goes into a septic tank, as I mentioned before it goes into the, not the whey, the milk wash water. Okay, next slide. This just shows some pictures of the cows at the Course Farm and the pasture at the farm. And Leon believes that because there is a very deep-rooted sod, that pasture is reflecting the deep-rooted sod from all those 35 years of not tilling, means that there's very good take-up of the manure when it is applied. And there's also increased organic matter on the farm from all of these years of no tilling. And that also means that there may be good nitrogen retention in the soil. And the picture on the right shows the articulated manure pump that's part of the agitation system at the farm. And that pump both agitates the material in the storage tank and also pumps it onto the manure spreaders. Okay, next slide. So our assessment of the situation at the Course Farm is that it's potentially feasible. You could add whey, as I mentioned before. The agitation system is there, so it could be agitated at the time of the applications in summer or fall. But Leon pointed out that there are capacity issues. Usually the storage tank is full in the spring, so it would be difficult to add any additional material at that time. But again, summer or fall would be possible. But you'd really need to assess the cost benefit, because running that agitation system is actually pretty time and labor intensive. So you can go on to the next slide. So just looking at both farms together, while there's a low percentage of solids in the lagoon at the Elmley farm, also because milk room wastewater is being added and rainwater gets in there, the addition of whey could increase the nutrient content of the lagoon, which is currently used for irrigation, and that would provide an added benefit. And so, again, the synergism of the on-farm whey production and the currently existing spray irrigation system makes this feasible. But yeah, and then at the coarse farm, probably we currently think that there's not much need for acidification of the system because the percent solids is low due to the addition of the wash water, and the dissolved ammonia is quickly carried down into the soil by the infiltrating water rather than remaining on the surface as a slurry. And that's in line with UVM guidance that there is less ammonia volatilization as the solid contents go down in that type of a system. Okay, pass it back to Abe.
Oh, you're muted, Abe.
Thank you, Bradley. Yeah, so we did several trials in the lab. We had 3 of them. One we're not reporting on. That was a pre-trial to start to dial in some of our recipes. Then we did this 100-day trial where we fermented different recipes in test tubes for actually 98 days. And then the 3rd trial was an ammonia volatilization trial where we put small amounts of each recipe in a jar, allowing it to volatilize in the jar and measure how much ammonia came out. So I'll get to that last one, but this is the 100-day trial where we did quite a few recipes, and then we tested the pH of them at these different test points, 0, 7, 14 days, and so on. Some of them we stored at 4 degrees Celsius, which is about 40 degrees Fahrenheit, and then some of them all the same recipes we also stored at 24 Celsius, which is a bit above room temperature to look at warm and cool fermentation behaviors. And the different feedstocks we used were pasteurized urine from our project. That's stored urine with a lot of nitrogen. You can see up here, not there. Huge, there you go. You can see it had 0.88% nitrogen, which is about 8.8 grams of nitrogen per liter. The other one's the liquid manure, which is fresh liquid manure, had about 1/4 as much. And then the digested manure had a middling amount of nitrogen. So it's just to bear in mind, looking at the rest of the study, they were not equal in their nitrogen content. And so then we looked over time at how much the pH changed. So this is time 0 when we first mixed up the recipes, and some of them, the blue ones, had acid whey. So that actually brought the pH a bit lower even to start with before fermentation went on. But then as the days progressed from 0 through 25 through 100 days, ultimately, you can see on this chart, the pH is going up or down for the various formulas. And some of the high performers that we really liked on this were the acid whey, and so got some notes here. I'm trying to split my screen. Yes, so the 6.5 and the 12.5% acid whey were good performers, as well as the 10% paper. Some things to note on this are in the warm treatment, pH dropped very quickly with the very high levels of sweet and acid whey, whereas on the cold side, they dropped more slowly. But there was also on the warm fermentation, there was a rebound where pH has dropped within a few days, but then rose. We assume as some of that lactic acid that was formed was consumed by other organisms and other processes in the warm state, but not so quickly on the cold one. So there may be some benefit to doing this in a not so warm environment in terms of having the pH go down and stay down. Red arrows all this point to the treatments that we continued into the next trial because we thought that it had some merit. Then looking at digestate, it took substantially more additives to get digestate to do anything. So we had good performance from this like 25% acid whey, the 50% sweet whey, but that means adding 25% means that we added 25% by weight whey to 100% by weight of the digestate. So for say 1 pound of digestate, adding 0.25 pounds of acid whey. So it's a substantial addition and a substantial volume increase. So what we took from that is it's a little harder to get the digestate to change its pH. You have to actually add more of the whey or the paper fibers. And then with urine, we found that also was able to acidify. If we added very large amounts, 66% or even 100% whey, that drove the pH down rapidly and profoundly. But there were other less extreme measures, like with the 6.25% acid whey, also had a noticeable performance. That's a very, very small amount of addition of whey, and we still got a move on the pH. So here we were just trying to gauge what's the least amount of material we can add to these different kinds of manure or urine to get some pH movement. And then we moved on to taking several of those recipes that did move the pH downward and testing to see, well, what was the actual real world effect of doing that once we put it in a jar. So here we have, this method is taken from Bradley Kennedy in her dissertation. There's a little cup of, this looks like it's probably fermented urine in here, and then and that's open so that the ammonia can volatilize out of that cup into the jar space. And then this is an acid trap of boric acid, where any ammonia that's floating around in the air will get dissolved pretty aggressively into this trap and change the color of the trap. And then once the traps change color, we can, I got some animations here, sorry. We can titrate them to see how much ammonia we actually captured. So this simulates land application. Obviously it's not, it's an approximation, but it simulates it. We used our favorite recipes, and then we followed these procedures to be able to quantify how much ammonia volatilized. And we did that 3 times for each, so we'd have statistical analysis power. And there was Gretchen doing all that work. Gretchen did a lot of the legwork all the legwork on the acidification, and a lot of legwork on the volatilization, and a lot of the earlier work as well, along with the others who were mentioned. And our results were striking and encouraging. So this is the liquid manure. And what we have here is how much ammonia volatilized over days, over time, as the days went by. And the red line is the control. So this is no fermentation. We just kept some of that liquid manure, let it sit, a lot of the nitrogen turn to ammonia as it would naturally, and then saw, yes, there's a lot of volatilization in the first few days, and then it sort of plateaus off or begins to plateau off over time. This is the best performer down here. Over the first 4 days, no volatilization happened. The 6th day, a tiny bit, and then more volatilization happened after that, and that was the 12.5% acid whey. But the 6.25% did pretty well too, as did the 10% paper fibers. Those all were, they cut the volatilization perhaps in half, or of course eliminated it down here over many days. So instead of having only 8 to 24 hours to till your manure in before you've lost substantial ammonia, this gives you several days to accomplish that, which is significant. With the digestate, we also saw with the 25% acid whey, profound effect over several days, and then beginning to volatilize, but effective, just taking more whey to do it. And then for the urine, this is the 100% addition. So this is 1-to-1, equal parts of whey and urine, and that is a lot of whey to add, but it eliminated volatilization essentially for the entire study period. And then the lesser amounts of acid whey still had a very good effect. The sweet whey had an effect, but lesser. And I just want to point out for this, if you were just trying to eliminate ammonia volatilization, it's probably overkill. Whoops. But there is evidence. It's not been well studied yet, but there is evidence there may be some benefits to plant growth and perhaps to soil health, but certainly plant growth by lactic acid bacteria in the soil. So this may be also on top of this effect, may be good for plant growth, and that would need to be studied, but it could be a biostimulant, and we haven't had a chance to look into that. Am I doing out of time? So one thing that we wanted to really get a sense of is how acidic do these manures or urines have to become before we're reducing volatilization. And so this chart is looking at the digestate, the liquid manure, and the urine, looking at pH on the x-axis versus how much volatilized on the y-axis. And in each case, we're seeing low pH, low volatilization, high pH, high volatilization, positive trend. And that happens down here for liquid manure and down here for the urine. So sure enough, as expected, the lower the pH, the less volatilizes. And you can see with the urine, around pH 7, that's a good gain. a little more confusing with the manure. A lot happens around pH 7, so it depends really on the formula. With digestate as well, if it's below 7, great. If it's well above 7, not so great. We don't have a whole lot in between, so there's more can be fleshed out here, but that trend is certainly real. And that's it for our lab trials, and we can talk about any questions at the end. We have time to go over any details people are interested in particularly. Tatiana, back to you.
Okay, great. Yeah, so I just wanted to explain that we always try to do some amount of what we call social research with all of our projects, just to kind of make sure that we understand what people need and what their concerns are, so that our research is really informing, in this case, farmers and ag educators who might want to use these systems. So our goal was to understand the feasibility of these methods on a range of farm types and to learn what farmers need in those different situations. And our plan has been to interview about 7 to 10 additional farmers in the region. We're still in process, although this grant ends shortly, but in the next few weeks, we could still interview some more farmers. So if anybody participating has suggestions for additional people to interview, please get in touch with us. Okay, you can go to the next slide. And this just mentions that farmers, one of the things that came across strongly in the interviews so far is that people are very interested in retaining nitrogen in their manure for various reasons, including wanting to ensure that the forage is of the highest quality for their cows, and also for economic reasons, to reduce off-farm inputs, and for environmental considerations, to make sure they're making the best use of their manure. And as one person said, we're interested in anything that could benefit our crops and minimize environmental impact. And just in terms of the various main points that were raised, that clearly the size of the manure storage pit is going to be very important. The type of agitation system that's available, familiarity and comfort with using paper fibers and whey. And some people are already using paper fibers for solidifying their manure, making it easier to manage, and then applying that to their land. So they had some, thoughts about the use of paper fibers and their availability. It's a readily available material. And also whey, some people were already adding whey to their lagoons. So just as a way of dealing with the whey and then applying it to the land. So there's some familiarity with these additives. And then a big concern was the degree of permitting and other paperwork that might be involved. People were definitely not wanting to get involved with something that was going to involve a lot of paperwork, and hoped that if this was available, that somebody else would have done all that already. Okay, next slide. In terms of the interviews that were done so far, it seemed that whey appeared to be a more attractive additive. As one person said, it would be much easier to add something like that because we're looking for liquid anyway, and sometimes we have to add additional water to get enough to pump out the material and make the manure pumpable. So adding liquid to that would be a good choice. Another concern that people had with any kind of additive would be that they were free of any contaminants, such as PFAs, as Abe mentioned before. And it was just mentioned that more and more some of the buyers of the milk, such as Dairy Farmers of America, are becoming pretty concerned about sort of public perception about what goes on in the fields, and wanting to be able to ensure customers, including landowners. A lot of farmers rent a lot of land, and their landowners have some concerns about what is being put on the soil. So wanted to be sure that they could ensure people that there were no contaminants. Also, in these interviews, I mostly asked people about whey and paper fibers, but as they knew we were also doing research on urine, they expressed interest in adding urine to the manure storage. And Pete could talk more about that, as he's one of those who was interested in that, to increase the nitrogen content of the storage, and in some cases also to just add another liquid for ease of application. Okay, next slide. And this is just a picture of some of the different kinds of storage pits. There's many different kinds, and the one on the right, for example, here is a very big 1.8 million gallon tank. And so the person who was interviewed with that farm was very enthusiastic and thought that adding whey would be a great option. There's no problem in terms of capacity. The one on the upper left was a smaller lagoon that requires frequent pumping out. So for that, it might be more of an issue, depending on how much is added, needs to be added. And the one on the bottom left is a different type of manure pit where the liquids and the solids are removed separately from the pit. So that might be a more tricky kind of situation in terms of the agitation that's needed. So I'm just kind of speculating here, and we can maybe talk further during the discussion. And so farmers had a number of questions and curiosities, such as, would adding whey help, as I think Abe just mentioned, that it might help with other nutrient needs besides nitrogen, or maybe adding the bacteria might help with the nitrogen uptake. Some farmers with no-till systems mentioned that they're double cropping with a different cover crop, and during that second cover crop had a higher need for nitrogen, and maybe whey enhanced manure at that time, or whey and urine enhanced lagoon water might be a good application prior to the second crop. And again, with people moving to no-till systems, they might be concerned that there is some nitrogen loss on application on those systems because they can't really incorporate it into the soil, and wondering if the bio-acidification would help with this. And also concerns about the timing of these additives and how that would mesh with crop needs. Okay, next slide. And so some questions that we might discuss coming up is about the cost and availability of these fibers. Where are they available locally? How much do they cost? Again, the question of people already using paper fibers with their bedding, could that be added to the manure storage in a beneficial way? What would the paperwork and permitting issues be, and regulatory issues? Are there any? And that might also be pertinent to organic certification. What concerns, again, do the milk buyers or landowners of the rented fields have? And what is the best way? Farmers really were interested in knowing how could they anticipate exactly how much nitrogen retention they would have, what would be the resulting nutrient composition of the slurry or the lagoon water, and any other questions that people have. And so we'll move to a discussion, but first we wanted to give Pete and Leon a chance to just respond to what you've heard so far, and maybe give us your assessment of these possibilities. So maybe we'll start with Pete, if you would like to. Maybe we could move from the slides back to the people. Pete, are you available? You're muted.
I'm coming.
Hi.
Majors here.
Or if you're not ready, we could start with Leon.
Grab the kids, and we've got some steam and tomato sauce to make it. Okay.
Good morning. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Timing. I think you summarized our position here at Putney very well, Tatiana. I was interested in Abe's research there. I think it will be difficult to use our facility as a research facility because we can measure the amount of whey going in pretty easily, but the amount of rainwater that falls, varies widely, and I have to pump out at various times throughout the year. So that's going to be hard to quantify. But I would rely on Abe's research to say that we are doing the right thing, adding our own whey, and perhaps adding additional whey because our lagoon is currently undersized, but slated for replacement next summer. And at that point, we would have room for additional whey. We still wouldn't have an agitation system, but it's kind of a unique system here. We have a solids pit and a straight liquid pit.
One thing I was just wondering is, so your whey would be the sweet whey, correct?
Yes.
Yes. So, and you had mentioned that you might be interested in also bringing in some whey from outside. So I wondered if maybe bringing in some acid whey would also help.
I'd rely on your research to tell me what the benefits for that would be. I'd also be interested in adding urine,
Right. Yeah,
which would seem like somewhat of a no-brainer.
Right.
To get more nitrogen out there. But yes, we'd like to stabilize it. It might not be worth the effort if it was too volatile and just going off. I drove through Cabot, Vermont the other day and was wondering what happened to all their whey, because there's not that many farm fields within a short trucking distance. And I wondered if any of it was being directly applied, or it was going into manure pits or what. So I think there's widespread application for this research.
Right. I forgot to mention, I did learn from, and maybe Tom Beaudry, who's also here, might know more about this, but that whey is being land applied in New Hampshire because there's excess whey, available, and people are being paid to take it and land apply it. So that's interesting.
Yeah, in my situation, it'd probably be easier most of the time just to add it to the lagoon.
Right.
Because of, cropping and mud and whatever. I think my vet showed up an hour early. I might have to duck out here, but we'll see.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll switch to thank you, Pete.
Thank you.
We'll have more, add more when we have more open discussion, but we'll move to Leon if you're available and could unmute yourself. Great. Hi.
Good morning.
Morning.
Tatiana explained our farm quite well. I was interested in being part of this research because I'm always looking for innovative ideas, particularly related to fertility. She outlined pretty well the challenges of us adding anything to the manure that adds much volume. We don't have a lot of excess storage capacity. But I think the concept is great, and I think that there's the potential, if this research could evolve to actually being put into practice on some farms, and followed to make sure that what the research is showing actually happens in real life, if you will. There may be the ability to get NSCS on board with actually allowing farmers to cost share larger manure storages than they need for their own animals and wastewater, so that they have the ability on the farm to add something to the waste stream to tie up the nutrients and better utilize them. So I'm very interested in the concept, but as we've outlined, it's just not very feasible for us, at least during the winter time, because we don't have a lot of excess capacity left by the time spring comes. But I'm very open to continuing to be a part of this discussion and seeing what we can all learn from it.
And one thing I just wondered, also hearing the results of the lab trials about the cold and the difference between cold and warm moments, whether that fall application that you mentioned, doing it in the fall when it's of course right now we're getting into the fall and it's not cool at all, but maybe in the fall would be the best time to do this once it's cool, write your last application. But okay, well, thank you, Leon. And we could open it up now to discussion from everybody, and like to hear people's responses to both what you heard from the farmers and also from the lab trials. What you think about any of those questions we raised, or any other questions that you might have. And you can also put questions in the chat if that's easier for some people.
For those questions that can come in.
Well, those are from our slide.
Oh, gotcha. I can also add, while people are maybe typing in questions or thinking of questions, one thing that I wanted to mention and forgot is that we tried doing fermentation with added inoculation culture or starter culture. So for the digestate, the digested manure, the fresh manure, and the urine, we tried them just as is with whey or fibers, and then also we added in a slurry we made, like a little inoculant out of silage and yogurt and probiotics pills, just to get a wide range of microbes. And we found there wasn't really any effect on the two manure materials, but on the urine there was a big effect. And I could go to that slide. I'm not quite sure how to hop there right now, but I can also describe it, which is that the urine samples with culture, the pH dropped more quickly and more reliably for many of those formulas. And it definitely also brought up the question of, well, we just picked a random amount of that inoculant to share. What kind of random things to inoculate with? It could be that inoculating with a larger amount or better chosen microbes could even add more to that process. So make the fermentation happen faster or perhaps more effectively.
Yeah, and I would just add too that I did ask the farmers being interviewed if they were familiar with the biostimulants or had interest in that, and the response mostly was that people were very interested in hearing more about this, but they weren't too familiar yet with using it. Although a couple of people mentioned the use of this fertilizer called Coron, thinking that was a biostimulant, but our understanding is it's not actually a biostimulant. It's just a type of sort of slow release nitrogen fertilizer. I don't know if it has biostimulant added, but people were very interested in whether this would have some additional benefits with nutrient uptake.
Yeah, and so you can see Julie got this graph up on the upper tier. This is with culture, and like these lines drop quite nicely all together. And these lines have substantial decrease, whereas down here it's more of a flat line. There on the cold and on the warm, it's sort of jagged, and they don't track together. They don't all reach as low, so it definitely had an impact. I don't want to oversell the potential for biostimulant, because that's not really where we focused our research, but we did see enough papers that it seemed like there is some active interest in that, and some encouraging results that lactic acid fermentation bacteria, like we were producing through fermenting whey, could have a positive effect. So that's just something to flag for future research and to keep in mind as perhaps an added benefit, but not one that we were able to quantify or even look into very much.
Just want to say thank you for speaking to the inoculation of the material, because that was something I was about to ask, but you got ahead of me there. Very cool. Thanks.
I would be curious, Tom Beaudry, if you now having heard the lab results and the what we saw with our site visits and involvement with the partner farmers, if you have any thoughts yourself. Tom was one of the advisors, I should mention that. We had two advisors on this project. One was Tom Beaudry, nutrient management specialist consultant, and the other was initially Joshua Allen from the NRCS, and then Tom Aiken, who took over from Josh. But Tom, what are your thoughts?
Several things. Coron is just a fertilizer.
Okay.
So it's nitrogen and there's some trace minerals in there and it has some safeners in it, so it can be applied foliarly. Okay. I found it interesting, the addition of the cultures that you put in and what happened, because there are a number of people with liquid systems that are approached by people to, put this in your pit and it's going to do all sorts of magic for you. You saw more with the urine than you did with the manure. Is that correct, Dave?
Yes, that's right. And it's not surprising because the urine was collected sort of separately and also pasteurized due to state regulations. So it was pretty diminished microbial community. And manure from the bottom of the floor of a barn or digested manure, I imagine, has all kinds of robust communities in it already.
Yes, yes. In your research, the addition of the acidified whey, and it's not surprising, but it's the actual volume amount. And this comes back to Leon as well, saying, especially in the winter, he wouldn't have room to put that in his manure pit. And a lot of the liquid pits basically are in the same boat Leon's in. By the time spring rolls around, they can start spreading. Their pits are full, and to be able to add even 12% or whatever would be a challenge. It's interesting that it does keep the manure, drops the pH very quickly. That's, quite interesting.
Tom, to speak to that capacity issue, the 6.5% addition did have a noticeable benefit as well, although that still does mean adding material, so it's just less addition, but if you're full, you're full. I do wonder more about fall application. Leon definitely singled that out as a time that might be practical, is to add it during the summer, because he had enough room and it does fall application. So perhaps it's more widely suited for summer addition and fall application, and then the winter addition would only be if you have excess capacity, like Pete Stickney is hoping to do at Putney School, and that large tank that Tatiana interviewed the farmer there, they do. So maybe some folks would and other folks wouldn't be able to do that.
I think most people would for a fall application. But yes, you'd be limited on the number of farms that would be able to put that even at 6% for during the winter.
Leon.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to bring up again the point that if we're going to add something to a manure storage, there's got to be a cost benefit analysis to show that, especially the extra fuel and also the extra time. In our case, we haul manure as far as 4 miles one way. And so there's a pretty significant cost to that, both in operator time and fuel and machinery costs. So part of the research that I would encourage you to do is the cost benefit portion.
Yeah, that's definitely, I agree with that suggestion. And part of that analysis would include the added nutrients from the whey, because the sweet whey, for instance, has almost as much nitrogen as your manure pit liquid manure, Leon. The acid whey is maybe half that much, but in any case, it is still getting more nutrients as well as requiring storage capacity and labor and fuel to handle. So it's definitely has a few factors going on.
Well, on an organic farm particularly, it's very hard to come up with potential nitrogen sources that you can add. So that would be an interesting aspect to that.
That leads to a question I was just going to ask, which was if anybody here has any thoughts about whether there would be concerns about, or whether we would be able to add this on organic farms, because I think at some point we thought, well, maybe no, that wouldn't be feasible, but we don't actually know whether there'd be any questions raised about that. About whether organic farms would, whether there'd be any question about whether these additives would be okay to add, whether it would be actual under the actual regulations or just in terms of perception or concerns that people might have. I don't know. So I was just curious if anybody here had any thoughts or knowledge about that. Leon, you probably would be the person most likely to know whether there would be any concerns. Tom.
Yeah, I'm kind of waiting for Leon to respond, and I'm thinking, in my mind, the addition of the whey would be easier on an organic farm than the addition of the short paper fiber. And
Right.
the PFAs are definitely a concern, and with any farm, whether they're organic or conventional.
Well,
Right. Go ahead, Leon.
My comment would be that most organic farms in Vermont are certified by Vermont Organic Farmers, and they, in my experience, are very good at working with farmers to determine what's allowable and what isn't. So I don't think it would be a problem to find out what their perspective would be. My concern would be whether there would be a pass-through of any potential prohibited substances levels in the whey that could be brought on to an organic farm. In the conventional world, there are thresholds of what is allowable in, pesticides and chemicals and antibiotics. And in organics, that threshold is basically zero. So having these products tested for whatever Vermont organic farmers thought might be an issue would be an important aspect to consider.
Right. And I just also wondered, now that this issue sort of came up, whether the farmers who are already using paper fibers, whether any organic farmers would be already using those in their bedding, or whether they would not be using them for that reason, those concerns.
This is Joanne Chickering, and I actually work for resource management that handles a lot of the paper fiber, and typically no, the paper fiber is not something that would be used on organic farms for bedding, really, or otherwise. And that's just part of the process that the paper goes through when it's recycled. I think that there's sorry about the noise, but that's not one of the uses of it that we do, is use it for organic farms. And to speak to the PFAS amount just a little bit too, it does get tested quite regularly, and as far as it is lower than what's found in background levels of soils of unaffected fields. So that is a concern, certainly, but it's a concern in everything, that it's just part of our society at this point.
Right. Okay. Thank you for that information. Any other questions? There's only a few minutes left in our scheduled time here. Not to put you on the spot, Bradley, but I just wondered if you had any thoughts, as you were one of the initial instigators of this project.
Yeah, well, it was really cool to see all this work that you guys have done. Really, really awesome work. Yeah, I guess I was just thinking I believe that ammonia volatilization is higher and faster in warmer weather. So as far as like winter storage times, it might actually work really well just to do it in the summer. when there's more storage capacity, or in the warmer months at least. But yeah.
You mean right after people have applied in the spring, when the
Yeah, I
capacity.
think that's what Leon was saying, was that he applied 3 times and the big
Sure.
storage crunch was over the winter. So so maybe he could just, for example, on that farm, it could just be the other 2 storage periods. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay, well, great. I don't know if anybody else has any final words, but we were, Benson, did you have a comment?
Yeah, real quick. Just wondering if this presentation will be available for us, or if the slides will be available, and if you expect to publish this data in some form to look at later, that sort of thing.
Yeah, the presentation will be available to everyone who's registered or anyone else who contacts us and wants it. And the final report will be available on the SARE Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education Program on their website. That probably won't be available for a couple of months after the project is over. So sometime this winter, late fall, early winter, it'll be available. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
On our website as well, under our research tab to that report.
Right.
Thanks.
Abe, did you have any final word?
Well, I guess just that it was a really interesting project to do. It was a lot of fun to formulate the experiment and to get all this input from farmers, and encouraging that it seems like there is benefit using materials that we have available in Vermont, and there's a lot more to look into that in terms of on the farm feasibility and cost and benefit, like Leon was requesting further study on. And then also we just looked at 4 degrees Celsius and 25 degrees Celsius, and those are very far apart intentionally, so we could see, does temperature have an effect? It sure does. And probably important to look at what are the actual manure pit temperatures or urine storage or digestate storage temperatures in those seasons when people could be adding weight, when they have excess capacity. So I think that kind of points us in a direction, but we're very encouraged by our initial results, and very appreciative to all the farmers who work with us and talk to us about how this might incorporate into their practices.
Great. Well, thanks everybody. And as I said before, if anybody present has any suggestions for additional farmers to interview, please get in touch with us. Thanks.
Thanks everybody. Thanks for coming.